I've been playing real-life Whac-A-Mole recently and have been getting way too good at it. But after years of honing my whacking skills, it's become stale and almost as easy as Sunday morning. I needed a new challenge, and what better challenge is there than to be a synthetic mole forever shackled to a cheap plastic box, destined to rise up only to get beat into submission for all eternity. So I thought it'd be fun if I became the mole, and a robotic arm wielding a squeaky hammer became the whacker. Please let me go. Now, if you haven't heard of Whac-A-Mole before, Mr. Cave Dweller, allow me to fully explain the game. So for me to become the world's largest mole, I'm going to need to build three things: a human-sized arcade box that I can mole play as a lawn terrorist in, a big scoreboard to keep track of my points, and a robotic arm that swings a hammer into my thought dome with the world's most annoying hit marker. First up was the arcade box, and determining the size of hole my head needed to fit through proved difficult, so I thought bucket, and believe it or not, that gave me a perfect circle template which I cut out and used to draw my places of excursion. After prairie dogging around to make sure the holes would work, I put together a frame and expertly mounted the top panel on said frame, which gave me the basic arcade box. Now that the size of my molehill was figured out, I measured the length needed for the robotic arm by becoming the robotic arm, which was about 2 forearms worth. A while ago I tried to build this robot arm from scratch in less than 8 hours during a live stream, and it worked perfectly with no flaws in its design. I then salvaged the servo motors from the deceased extremity, which will be used to control the new arm joints, and after an intense and riveting 3D modeling session, I began assembling my future abuser. The assembly consisted of base, servo, lethargic Susan, blue thing, bearing, other servo, shaft, and arm bone mount. And for the next half hour, I came to understand why most people hate engineers and was one impossibly small working space away from calling Sheen and seeing if any of their workers would be available after school. 3 yuan later, I had a pretty solid robot arm base, which I transfused electrons to from my laptop, and we both began to do a little dance. The robot arm because it's all it knows, and me because I promised Casey that tonight would finally be the night that I got down. I've been known to suffer from premature celebration, however, and I had a feeling that once I installed the arm bone, everything would break. Despite the robot's best efforts to leave this mortal plane, I got it under control, and to my surprise, everything stayed together. I then used my orthopedic skills to attach the patient's elbow and forearm to the rest of the arm and got ready for another successful test. At first I thought the incident occurred because I forgot to wash my hands before the surgery, but it turns out the shaft just snapped like it was made out of plastic. This was partially due to the fact that it was printed standing up, causing the FDM layer lines to be perpendicular to the torsion force torque vector at a 6 o'clock degree angle per second. I just made all of that up, but basically it's weak this way for what it needs to do, so I printed it laying down for better strength. And after reassembling everything, I really hoped this would work. Nothing broke. With the arm finally working, there was a noticeable lack of smacking apparatus at the end, and I decided to donate my conceal carry, which immediately made the robot a felon in California. You're never gonna believe this, but the added weight of the squeaky hammer resulted in yet another failure of the shaft, but this time, instead of breaking, the whole thing just twisted. And while we patiently wait for the printer to be done with new parts to fix that, let's talk about eyeballs. The robot needs some way of knowing what hole I am protruding from so it can move accordingly to that hole to deliver some high-pitched justice. So I purchased these IR transmitters and receivers, and when I apply a secret voltage level to the transmitter, it emits this nice purple light. This light is only visible to the camera though, and is invisible to the naked eye no matter how hard I tried. And if you look closely when I power on the IR receiver, you won't see anything because it doesn't emit anything. Now if I point these at one another, a connection is made and the LED lights up, but if something comes between the two, say a human-sized skull, the LED gets sad and shuts off. Like a true American, I used a gun to mount a pair of these at each hole, and then after exactly an eternity of running cables, each hole was ready to snitch on me to the robo arm once I surfaced. Speaking of that whole robot arm thing, the new parts were ready, and I began assembling the thing for the 9th time, making sure to be calm and enjoying the process.
Oh my lord. Robot arm
down as fast as it can go. Please, everything hold together. Whoa! Okay, now that it finally worked, I mounted it to my home, crawled under, and prepared to experience life as a mole.
That is terrifying! I'm not even out of there, sir.
The box is built, the robot arm was in my nightmares last night, and now all that's needed to make this an official arcade game is a scoreboard. Now these LEDs aren't the popular NeoPixel LEDs, but they are in a matrix, and unlike the IR LEDs, I can see these ones just fine. The idea is to program these LED matrices for use as a scoreboard, and since each LED is individually addressable and needs to be written to separately, I had a lot of writing to do. Dearest LED number 34, I hope this note finds you well. I implore you to search within your heart to find the strength to light up as RGB 25 103 345. I must now beg the others to carry out such courageous acts, and I bid thee farewell, LED 34, for I may not speak with you again for over 30 nanoseconds. Stay strong in my long absence. Until power failure do us part. Digital IO pin 12. Now imagine doing all of that hundreds of thousands of times per second, and you'll appreciate just how good the Electron Postal Service really is. I wanted to make LED text like this so the scoreboard can call you slurs when you get a bad score, and my first hurdle was figuring out where each LED lived. Their addresses were laid out like an S, which has gotta be the stupidest thing I've ever seen. This made it really difficult to make something as simple as the letter Y. That is a virus, is what that looks like. An embarrassing amount of time later, I finally had my Y and moved it too, but using both LED panels took up 91% of my memory, so I got rid of one. I figured I could just steal someone else's work who's already made all the letters, but I decided not to because my conscience wouldn't allow me to steal. Ultimately, making letters was just too expensive, and even though an intellectual in my Discord server pointed out a good solution, I chose to ignore him because he was right, and instead will be using LED lettering for other purposes down the road that I thought of all on my own. You should join too so that I can also ignore your advice. From there it was pretty simple to make the numbers and get a counter going, but the numbers are hard to see, so I'm going to use something called a diffuser panel, which, stay with me here, diffuses the light behind it and makes it a lot easier for the camera to see. With the scoreboard now able to bore score, I put together a backboard on the arcade box and mounted the diffuser panel, making sure to mount part of my finger as well. And after installing the LED matrix, everything was ready for a complete test, except hole 2. I couldn't get the sensor to work even when I pointed them right at each other, so consider hole 2 a wildlife refuge.
So when we pop up through here... Oh!
Boys, who wants to play a round of Whac-A-Dude? Now before we get to whacking, let me explain how the game logic works. The robot arm is asleep until I break a beam, where it enters ready mode and the scoreboard is prepared. The timer doesn't start until I break a beam again, and then I have 60 seconds to collect as many points as possible by poking my head out of a hole whilst getting obliterated by a vengeful robot. Once the timer is up, my final score is posted and the robot gently goes back to sleep. The time had finally come for me to put out or shut up, so I climbed inside the mole simulator and began the whackening. Even though the arm got stuck a couple of times, it was actually really fun to be the mole, even if most of the damage I sustained was from hitting my head on the box. My score versus the robot was 202, and I was curious to see how well it would do against a human. But if I'm a human playing as a mole, that must mean my wife with the hammer is actually a mole playing as a human and must be blindfolded because moles have almost no eyesight. The blindfold is definitely not because it's unbelievably easy to see inside of the box. I was totally destroying until the mole turned violent and started punching me and began using the illegal sweep method.
Okay, you can just sweep all of them. That's cheating.
Still totally crushed it though with the fat 381. Skill diff, GG easy.
Oh.
Well, that might be a problem.
Yeah.